Recognize Caroni Central.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't think I want to respond to many things said by the member for Toko Sangre Grande. All I would ask her, though, is that if she has any file on me, if she could simply tear that page out and get it. But that is the limit of what I would say about that. You might have to throw out the book, I guess. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in all seriousness, I want to reinforce, I think, what most colleagues have said on our side, which is that we recognize the good intention behind the bill. And we understand what was the thinking that went into it. But most of us feel that by addressing that problem in the way that it has been addressed, more problems have been created. And because of that, we are cautious and we are making suggestions that we think will improve and enhance the bill and give us a better bill on this issue of trespassing. So it is not that we are against the bill or the intention of the bill. It is that we feel that the bill is quite limited. And that is the real issue. Because we have no problem with property rights and recognizing it as something that must not be violated. We agree with that. That's an important principle. But one of the points that the member for Oropouche East made was that he located the bill in 1852. And he mentioned some of the things in the bill, Mr. Deputy Speaker, which really showed that it really was a bill rooted in colonial times. And if you wanted to modify it and modernize it, as in fact the member for Laventille West indicated that he wanted to do, you couldn't just tinker with it to address what was essentially an urban problem that has now begun to spread, and which was an HDC problem that is national. So it's not limited to HDC, it's not limited to urban settings. It is a national problem. And it involves more than just house. And it involves more than just land. And when you talk about house and land in Trinidad and Tobago, it is bound to be controversial because this is the basis on which people build their lives in countries such as ours. I just want to show the significance of this, the fact that this bill was in 1852, just for a minute. Emancipation, Mr. Deputy Speaker, was in 1838. So if this bill was 1852, this act, I mean, if this act was 1852, the original act, think of that in relation to 1838. Indenture started in 1845. This act is 1852. Indenture finished in 1917. The last amendment on this one was in 1936. So you're talking about a context here where you're bound to have problems if you're trying to bring the law into 2019. And this is the real issue. And we don't have a problem with the intention of the bill. We have a problem with how the transition to the current time has been managed. At that time, you had the state. The state was the owner of a lot of land in the country. But at that time also, you would have had big parcels of private ownership. Okay, they were plantations, basically. It was a plantation economy. You had a planter class. You had state ownership, you had private ownership. The state ownership was then known as crown lands. That is what it was known as. You know, look at the transition, look at the years. And agriculture was the big product. People were planting cocoa and, you know, that was the nature of the society. What we have had since then, and I'm fast-tracking now to the contemporary period, is that squatting is an issue in Trinidad and Tobago. State housing is a phenomenon of national life. Private development is organized business in Trinidad and Tobago. Real estate development is a major business, and you have international players in it in Trinidad and Tobago. The spread of property ownership is quite significant in this country over that period and in the contemporary time. And properties change hands all the time. And you have, as I mentioned before, the growing phenomenon of squatting. In our time, private ownership is under assault, though. And you have home invasions, which has been mentioned here by several of my colleagues who spoke so well, the member for Mayaro, the member for St. Augustine, and the member for Oropouche East. So private ownership is under so much assault that several years ago, the concept of gated communities became a reality and has now evolved as the preferred form of development in the country. Squatting has grown on both state and private lands. Some squatter communities have become sustainable communities. I have one in my own constituency which has evolved into something like that. Some have become problem areas. They have become, some of them, breeding grounds for crime itself. State housing has evolved since the 1950s, early 60s, and we have a situation where you have state housing which has turned out to be excellent, as in the Diego Martin area, the Diamond Vale area, one of the first ones that was ever done in this country, where you have serious organized residential communities. But you have other state housing that is a problem. They have, not only are they a problem, they were created under conditions in which problems that were bound to happen. So in that kind of situation, as we deal with the bill, we have to be cognizant of these kinds of issues. Now, most private developments have generally done well, although there have been problems with some, because sometimes the developers themselves do not follow town and country planning regulations to the letter. They don't follow what the local government tells them, etc. But by and large, the majority of them are pretty well done with reasonable standards. The gated communities, as I said, have become a way to go. There has been runaway expropriation of state lands in the country. You know, people just walk into a place. You were mentioning it just now, member for Toko Sangre Grande. The fact that you had people just walking on lands and taking them over, sometimes with violence. And the state has not been able to cope with the claims being made by people for legalization of ownership of lands in which the state is the owner, and they are or have been entrenched on the lands for some time. So there are many land tenure and land regularization issues, and this has been a particular nightmare in the agricultural sector, Madam Speaker. And my constituency has a lot of people involved in agriculture in it. Pridal larceny is a persistent problem. This is a violation of let me use my own pronunciation. So so this is a problem, and this, of course, is a violation of property. Home invasion, land invasion, and the growth of violence have become a factor almost everywhere. So, as you have private home ownership, private land ownership, the rental market, all of these things growing, lease market, all of these growing, but threats to legitimate ownership and legitimate claims to ownership have also grown. That is to say, people seeking to have legitimacy bestowed by the state, but threats also to this, both on private and people occupying state lands. That has also become an issue. Now, the limitation I feel with this bill in the presentation of the minister, both when he introduced the bill for the first reading and now that he spoke to the bill here in this session, is that he speaks of the general problem, touching on some of the things that are mentioned in here, but he particularizes the issue as an HDC problem. And I don't know if it is right to have a bill that simply addresses that problem when we have all of these attendant and related problems in the country that also need addressing. And I say that in good faith. The issue may have pertinence to the HDC, but the issue of trespass is a much bigger problem. It is a problem of property rights and of human security, on the one hand. So the problem is property rights and human security on the one hand. But on the other hand, Madam Speaker, and you would remember I started by saying that it was a colonial bill in colonial times, 1850s. And what we had there, and therefore the whole issue of property ownership and how it has evolved. It also raises the problem of social inequities in the society and the need for social justice to provide property ownership opportunities for and access to this for all who would want or desire it. So these are the twin sides of that inherited problem, Madam Speaker, from the history that we have had and the way the society has evolved. On the one hand, you want to root the capitalist elements of your society in property ownership. In fact, capitalism rests on that. Land, labor, capital, home ownership is fundamental to the capitalist idea. But at the same time, you want to address the question of justice in a society that has really been formed by colonial and imperial extensions. And the end result of that is you've had an evolution of a society that has been rooted in a number of inequities in the society. So the attendant issue now is the growth of violence and the forceful overpowering of others and predatory behavior towards the weak, the vulnerable, and the unsuspecting. And the minister was good enough, member for Laventille West, to raise that particular issue. And some members on the other side did raise it as well. And our members on this side acknowledge that as a critical issue. So the bill seeks to make amendments to the Trespass Act, but it's really about three things, and I want to reinforce this. Property rights and property ownership rights and human and property protection and security. Social and economic justice and the need to provide legitimate and legal routes to land and home ownership in the society. But thirdly, it wants to introduce laws or elements of the law, that's to say clauses in the law, which make enforcement of laws to deal with violence against the person and against property in the context of predatory behavior possible. And these are the three pins, so to speak, on which the law hangs. And we have no problem with the three of those, except that how it has evolved. And the limitations of the bill because of the few clauses in it and the small amendments, really two major, well, a few amendments. Now, this issue of land and property and the home invasion, and I don't want you to think that I'm being sensational here, Madam Speaker. I just want to mention a couple of things. We had a situation some weeks ago in which a 64-year-old farmer, her name is Angela McKenzie. She's a landowner. She had a nice piece of land. I don't know how much it was. It might have been 10, 12 acres or something like that. She's a gardener. She's a farmer. Somebody passed up and down the place. I don't know. They had some altercation. And the next thing you know, this woman who lives by herself simply eliminated from the face of the earth. All right? And what recourse does this lady have? You know? You had a situation where some years ago, and this is not in your time, so you need not be defensive about it, John Cropper, who was my good friend, Angela and John were good friends of mine. And John Cropper, somebody walked in his house and eliminated, you know, in his own property, in his own household. You had a situation where a doubles vendor in Balmain, Vancouver, 2 o'clock in the morning, Nashad Radhe, eliminated in his house. In October of 2018, Kenneth Ordins, 67 years old, invasion in the home, murder. And finally, and this is the last one, Nizam Mohammed, 60 years old, again, home invasion and murder. I mean, it is relevant to what I am saying because I'm saying that the law is limited. You cannot come and tell me that what you are doing here is protecting a tenant in an HDC home in Duncan Street, and that you are bringing a law to do that, and you are not doing it for all of these people and all of these things. You can't tell me that that is good law. And that is the whole point of my argument, Madam Speaker. And I think the minister understands that. He may understand what he's trying to do. And I think he understands that he's trying to do something that is worthwhile, which I concede. But I think he also understands that, look, maybe something is amiss here and we could make it better. And this is what I'm appealing to. That is the point of Parliament. So my point, therefore, is that the bill addresses an immediate problem, but it does not go far enough, and it creates loopholes, I think. And secondly, it does not address the issue of how sustainable enforcement will be achieved. Madam Speaker, this is a very important thing. My colleague from Oropouche East said, you know, you pass the law and you have the big fines, but how do you get this? And I think this is an important consideration if we're going to pass a law on something like this, which we are acknowledging, all right? The government is acknowledging that it is a real issue. They are saying it emerged in 2013. The member for Oropouche East said it emerged in 2013. But this is the law that has come now to address it. So how do you make the enforcement sustainable? How do you make sure that it does not turn out to be a nightmare, which is what it is promising to be? And of course, the bill does not address the issue of social and economic justice that I mentioned, which is the other side of the equation. So let us take a look at the text of the bill. All right? Now, it changes in clause 4, I believe, from, sorry, it changes from possession of any land and substituting the words lawful possession of any premises. Okay? I want to deal with this issue of lawful possession of any premises. Again, it talks about in the same clause the issue of enclosed yard. I want to deal with that particular issue. It talks about the issue of occupier. All of these are in clause 4. I also want to address some issues that arise in clause 8, and I might comment on the penalties. Now, many of the issues in clause 8, from my point of view, I am going to raise some questions, the minister can answer them. And I raise it on behalf of farmers and people in the agricultural sector. What is the significance of value of deeds of comfort for them? Does that give them lawful possession of their land? Because the word lawful is now inserted in the bill. Yeah. And I do not know, I need that clarified for me here today because I'm talking on behalf of thousands of farmers in my constituency. And the last thing by DEFCO was that they had about 13,000 farmers in this country, and many of them unregistered. So, do deeds of comfort constitute lawful possession? The second thing is, what happens to me if I am a farmer and I am in the process of application for regularization of a lease? And it is not yet consummated. That's right. Am I a legal owner of the land? Do you know that there are farmers on state lands, Mr. Member for Laventille West, and because they are not in possession, so to speak, they cannot fence their land? It is against the law. Well, you have to give me that.
If they are farming, please. If they are farming, they are in possession.
Yeah, you've been cute with me.
That's the law.
Huh?
That's the law. If they are farming the land, they are in possession.
But are they in lawful possession of any premises? Because, you see, this goes on to say you could fence your land and you could build this and so on. You can't fence your land. Do you know that there are farmers who have been waiting as long as 30 years for a lease? Do you know that new farmers on state lands are regarded as squatters on the land? No, this is important, man. Don't tell me 48-1.
Madam Speaker, I rise on 48-1. It might be important, but
but
relevant. I seek your ruling, Madam Speaker, as to whether the submissions of my friend from Caroni Central, important as they might be, are they relevant in the context of this debate? That is what I seek.
Yes, they are.
And I rule in accordance with the point he's developing now as what constitutes lawful possession that is relevant. Please continue.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. So the issue here is, what rights do they have pending lawful conveyance of the land in the form of a lease? Now, you yourself said, Minister, that the police would not intervene because it is a civil matter, and you're now making it law so that it becomes a criminal matter. But ask yourself the question, if you had the problem before of it being a civil matter, whether police will now intervene on farmlands without lawful ownership, if the law is now that you have lawful ownership. A farmer, even if he has been on his land for 30 years, waiting on the authorities to look at his file, need permission to construct a fence or a building, even if it is wood, not temporary. So the question here, and this is the fundamental one, does this bill at all address any of the issues faced by farmers, or is it ignoring them completely? The other issue in the agricultural sector is the issue of registered farmers and non-registered farmers. Of the 13,000 farmers, a large number of them are not registered. So, now the other issue. This clause talks about an enclosed yard. I said I would raise this. Is surrounded by a fence or a natural boundary or a combination of fence and natural boundary. B, is enclosed in a manner that indicates the occupier's intention to keep persons off the occupier's premises or to keep animals on the occupier's premises. Now, a gated community, Madam Speaker, has a fence around the contour, the perimeter of the property. All right? Trespass, therefore, involves any violation of that gate or the fence of the whole property. I want to ask how this particular bill addresses this issue of gated communities and the trespass issue in relation to a gated community. And I don't have to tell you about gated communities, they're all over the country now. Now, then the issue of property and firearms possession, when criminals have more guns than law-abiding citizens, and any criminal can buy a gun on the street for a few $100s or rent one for less. And the reason I raise that is this. If you are talking about an issue in the country, now, you presented part of this bill as a kind of crime prevention bill, and you are preventing this as a crime prevention bill in which you don't want criminals to take advantage of ordinary people for no reason whatsoever, to violate them, to take away their property, to run them out, etc. If you have a situation like that, which is emerging in the country where you need the legal basis to deal with it, you now come to make an amendment to do that. Does that raise the serious question of how people protect their property rights in the country and how they are treated in the law, in the disbursements of firearms, and all of those issues to protect their property? Yes.
See, I would rise on 48.1 in respect to this point.
Okay.
Okay,
I will
so I'll
leave
ask you to
that,
move.
Madam Speaker.
Yes.
No. The other issue, since you're dealing with violation of property, is the violation to the places of worship. How would this work in relation to that? In my own constituency, within recent times, we've had 3 such events. At the Lakshmi Narayan Temple, at the Hare Krishna Temple, at the Faith Assembly International Temple, and in the country itself, we've had violation at Trinity Cathedral. In Sangre Grande, on the Toko Manzalena Road, we had the breaking in of a mosque and the interfering with the prayer room and taking of money and so on. Does this bill address that? Does this bill address the issue of the protection of property rights and the criminalizing of that in relation to this?
You mean sacrilege?
Now, the issue, Madam Speaker, also of squatter regularization, land tenure issues, land ownership and property ownership I mentioned. The other issue that I mentioned, the social justice side. Now, there are 450,000 households in this country, according to the 2011 census, or thereabouts. But there is an HDC waiting list of 140,000. How to solve this problem? And this is the issue, the balance of property rights of the 450 and the route to opportunity of the 140,000, or I don't know how many, who live below the poverty line and own no
Honourable
property.
Member for Caroni Central, the original 30 minutes are now spent. You have 15 more minutes to complete your contribution if you wish.
I'll take a few minutes. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Now, in terms of the justice issue, I will not raise everything in relation. I raise just one point. For instance, I raised the agricultural issue. There are about 1,000 jobless graduates in agriculture at the tertiary level. And we have an agricultural production and food import problem in the country.
So, Member for Caroni Central, while I understood your earlier context setting, remember we're dealing with a particular
Yes.
bill.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
unless what you're saying, you could tie that back to this bill. The other things I understood you to be tying it back to what is lawful possession.
Yes.
I'm not sure now with employment where we're going.
No.
All right, so I remind you, I'm standing on 48.1 and asking you, unless you can very quickly tie that to this bill, I'll ask you to move on.
Would you give me an opportunity to explain it in just 30 seconds? And it was that, for instance, a route to land possession could be created for agricultural graduates in a way that would make them legal owners of property. That is the point.
Your
I
next
will
point.
move.
Thank you very much.
Yes. I will ask just one more question before I close. There is a section in 9, clause 9(2), which reads, it is clause 9(a)(2). Regulations made under this section may provide that the contravention of any regulation constitutes an offense and may prescribe penalties for any offense not exceeding a fine of $25,000 and imprisonment of 5 years. Now, the reason I raise it is because I don't know what the regulations would say. I mean, the minister would get up one morning and make a regulation. I have no doubt that it would be related to some reality in the society. But immediately that regulation is made without coming to Parliament or anything. That matter becomes an issue that I have to deal with as a citizen. So the uncertainty of it and the arbitrariness that it seems to suggest, all right, notwithstanding that you expect a minister to be responsible and look after his office properly, is an issue that I want to raise. The question is very simple. Why would you want to make a regulation like this? So I find it kind of odd, Madam Speaker, and I simply want to ask the question. So, Madam Speaker, in summary and in closing, what I would say is that we recognize on this side, I certainly do, the good intentions of the bill. We also understand the legitimacy of the issue having to do with the violation of ownership of HDC properties, homes, apartments in the urban sector, and the fact that something has to be done to take care of that. But I want to raise the wider issue if we are going to pass a law to deal with what is essentially the violent trespassing on property and sometimes assault on the person. If we are going to deal with the whole business of trespass on land and homes and property, and if we're going to deal with this properly on behalf of the law-abiding citizen, and if we are going to deal with it, anchoring it on the principle that property and the ownership of property should involve inviolable rights. If we are going to take that position, then this bill is too limited, Madam Speaker. And what we need is a bill that comprehensively take into account home and land ownership in a much more meaningful way as it exists today in 2019 in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much.